The microphone was live. The amplifiers hummed. The stage lights painted the rehearsal space in shades of amber and shadow. But Jim Morrison wasn't singing. He was standing perfectly still, one hand on the microphone stand, the other hanging loose at his side. His eyes were closed. His lips were parted, as if the next word was right there, waiting. But nothing came. Ray Manzarek's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Robbie Krieger's guitar hung silent in his hands. John Densmore's drumsticks were frozen mid-air. The three men looked at each other, confused, concerned, then back at Jim. They had been rehearsing for hours. It was late 1968, and the Doors were preparing for a string of concerts that would take them through the winter and into the new year. The songs were tight, the band was sharp, everything was ready. Except Jim. "Jim?" Ray finally said, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "You okay, man?" Jim opened his eyes slowly. He looked at Ray, then at Robbie, then at John. His expression was blank, but his eyes carried something else. Something distant. Something broken. "I can't sing this song," Jim said quietly. Ray leaned forward. "What do you mean you can't sing it? We've sung it 100 times. "I mean I can't sing it," Jim repeated, his voice still quiet but firmer now. "I don't believe the words anymore." The room went silent again. But this time, the silence felt different. Heavier. More dangerous. John set his drumsticks down carefully, like he was afraid any sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile thing was happening in that room. Robbie shifted his weight, his guitar strap digging into his shoulder. Ray just stared at Jim, trying to understand what was happening. "Which song?" Ray asked carefully. Jim looked down at the floor. "This one. The one we've been playing for 2 years. The one everyone loves. The one they expect." It was Light My Fire. The song that had made them famous. The song that had opened every door. The song that had given them everything. And Jim Morrison couldn't sing it anymore. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Over the past year, the band had noticed changes in Jim. Small things at first. A missed cue here, a forgotten lyric there. But lately, the changes had become bigger, harder to ignore. Jim had always been intense, yes. That was part of who he was. But now the intensity felt different. It wasn't creative fire anymore. It was something darker. Something that looked more like burning out than burning bright. He drank more. He showed up late. He stared off into space during conversations, and sometimes, like now, he would stop in the middle of a song and just disconnect. "Jim," Ray said, standing up from the keyboard. "Talk to us. What's going on?" Jim finally looked up. His face was tired. Not physically tired, but tired in a deeper way. Tired of something that sleep couldn't fix. "When I wrote this song," Jim said slowly, "I meant every word. It meant something. It was real. But now..." He trailed off, his hand still gripping the microphone stand. "Now what?" Robbie asked gently. "Now it's just noise," Jim said. "I open my mouth, and the words come out, but they don't mean anything. Not to me. Maybe they never did. Maybe I was just pretending they did." Ray walked closer to the stage, his hands in his pockets. "Jim, every artist goes through this. You feel disconnected from your old work. That's normal. But that doesn't mean the work isn't good. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter." Jim shook his head. "You don't understand. It's not just the song. It's all of it. The whole thing. This," he gestured around the room, at the instruments, the lights, the stage. "This whole performance. I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore." John stood up from behind the drums and walked over to stand next to Ray. "You're Jim Morrison. You're our singer. You're our friend. That's who you are." "No," Jim said. his voice suddenly sharper. Jim Morrison is a character. He's someone I invented. And now everyone expects me to keep being him. But I don't know if I can. I don't know if I want to. The three men exchanged glances. They had known Jim for years. They had started this band together. They had lived through the chaos, the fame, the pressure. But this felt different. This felt like something breaking that couldn't be easily fixed. Ray took a breath. So what do you want to do? Jim was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I want to stop pretending. I want to only sing words I believe. I want to stop performing and start telling the truth. What does that mean? Robbie asked. It means no more scripts, Jim said. No more rehearsed lines. No more singing songs the same way every night, because that's what people expect. If I don't feel it, I'm not doing it. Ray ran a hand through his hair. Jim, we have concerts coming up. We have contracts. We have people counting on us. I know, Jim said, and I'll be there. But I can't promise I'll be the Jim Morrison they're expecting. I can only promise I'll be honest. John spoke up. What if the audience doesn't like it? What if they want the old Jim? The one who performed? Jim looked at him with those intense blue eyes that had launched 1,000 magazine covers. Then they'll have to be disappointed. Because that Jim is gone. And I don't think he's coming back. The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. The rehearsal space suddenly felt too small, too enclosed. The walls seemed closer than they had been before. Finally, Ray spoke. His voice was calm, measured, but there was emotion underneath it. Okay, we'll figure it out. But Jim, you have to help us. You have to talk to us. You can't just shut down and disappear. Jim nodded slowly. I'll try. That's all we're asking, Ray said. But they all knew it wasn't that simple. Something had shifted in that rehearsal room. Something fundamental. The band that walked out of there that night wasn't quite the same band that had walked in. What happened next would become part of rock and roll legend, though few people understood the real story behind it. In the concerts that followed that rehearsal, Jim Morrison became unpredictable in a whole new way. He would change lyrics mid-song. He would stop singing altogether and recite poetry instead. He would improvise long spoken word passages that had nothing to do with the music playing behind him. Sometimes it was brilliant. Sometimes it was uncomfortable. Sometimes it was both. Audiences were divided. Some thought he was a genius pushing boundaries. Others thought he was drunk, unstable, spiraling. Both were probably true. But what no one understood at the time was that Jim Morrison was doing exactly what he said he would do that night in rehearsal. He was telling the truth, his truth, even when it was messy, even when it was painful, even when it made people uncomfortable. Ray Manzarek would later say in an interview, decades after Jim's death, that the night Jim stopped mid-song was the night the Doors became something different. We stopped being a rock band that night, Ray said. We became something closer to a living, breathing organism. Unpredictable, dangerous, real. Robbie Krieger remembered it differently. I was scared, he admitted. I thought we were going to fall apart. I thought Jim was going to walk away and never come back. But looking back now, I think that was the moment he was most present, most himself. John Densmore, who had the best view of Jim from behind the drum kit every night, said this: Jim wasn't performing anymore after that night. He was confessing. Every song became a confession. Every concert became a ritual where he tried to figure out who he really was, in front of thousands of people. That's terrifying, but it's also the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. The night in the rehearsal room, after Jim finally walked off the stage, the three remaining band members sat in silence for a long time. They didn't discuss what had happened. They didn't make plans. They just sat there, processing. Finally, Ray spoke. "This is going to change everything, isn't it?" Robbie nodded. "Yeah, I think it is." John added quietly, "Do you think he's going to be okay?" No one answered that question, because none of them knew. Jim Morrison was standing at the edge of something, and they couldn't tell if he was about to fall or about to fly. What they didn't know that night, what none of them could have known, was that Jim had less than 3 years left to live, that by July 1971 he would be gone, and that every song, every performance, every confession from that night forward would become part of his legacy. But maybe Jim knew something they didn't. Maybe he felt time running out. Maybe that's why he stopped mid-song that night and refused to keep pretending, because he knew he didn't have time to waste on words that didn't mean anything anymore. The rehearsal space was dark now. The instruments were packed away. The stage lights were off. But something lingered in that room, something that would follow the doors for the rest of their time together. The truth. Raw, unfiltered, sometimes ugly, sometimes beautiful, but always real. And Jim Morrison, the man who had stopped mid-song because he couldn't lie anymore, walked out into the Los Angeles night, alone with his thoughts, alone with his doubts, alone with whatever darkness or light he carried inside. He lit a cigarette, he looked up at the sky, and he kept walking, not sure where he was going, not sure who he was anymore, but certain of one thing. He would never sing a word he didn't believe again, even if it cost him everything. And in the end, maybe it did. But it also gave us something we still can't quite name, something that still echoes decades later. The sound of a man refusing to perform his own life. The sound of someone choosing truth over comfort. The sound of Jim Morrison, mid-song, stopping and saying no. No more scripts, no more performances, no more pretending. Just this, just now, just the truth, however broken it might be. That was the night Jim Morrison stopped mid-song, and nothing was ever the same again.